So the risks that are logged in that meeting aren't pitched at the right level, in my opinion.
But do you think that's because we've got that age-old problem around really what do we mean by a risk? Are we defining risks appropriately? Have we really explained well enough what we mean by a risk? Sometimes it gets confusing, doesn't it? People describe a risk, it's really an issue.
Yeah. That's absolutely one of the concerns, I think. But it stems down to that explanation of the front end. Has somebody gone through the program team and said, this is what a risk is, this is how you raise it, here's the mandatory fee, all that good stuff that should be happening up front. I think, again, we're finding a situation where that's a gap, I think.
But some of that's down to basics. Even as we all often do, is have to say, what do we mean by a risk? When we're describing a risk, we say, there is a risk that the following may happen, and if that happens, then it will become an issue. And then we're describing how we're going to try and mitigate that risk before it becomes an issue. But often people just kind of put in a short description. So there's a risk that Avtar's going to leave the program tomorrow. That's not the risk.
Yes.
The risk is if you leave the program tomorrow, there's no one running the PMO. So what we're going to do to mitigate that risk?
Yeah, and it's interesting when you said Avtar's going to leave the program tomorrow. So that in terms of the date, I mean, the number of meetings I sit in where risks and issues are discussed, and I would say more than 50%, it's okay, let's move it out 1 week, and we'll come and talk about it again. And I think that for me, what people forget is across most programs, the people you tend to have sitting in these. I mean, they call them raid meetings. That's another thing. I think they're not raid meetings. They are meetings where you discuss risks and issues. The rest of the raid part, it's not really tabled.
Yeah.
But just bringing it back to those dates, moving things on 1 week. I mean, it's okay if that's a decision you've made. But having most of your senior team sitting in a meeting for even an hour a week, it's a lot of hours that you're spending just to come and say, I'll come and tell you.
Well, how many times have you changed the structure of the raid meetings throughout a programme? So you typically start with, we're going to have a raid meeting, it's mandatory, everybody's got to be there, it's for an hour every week and it's on a Tuesday afternoon. And then before you know it, you're doing it every couple of weeks and only half the people are attending. Because do people really buy into raid meetings? Do people really, not necessarily understand the importance, but really appreciate why it's so important? I'm not sure that people do. And you see that on different programs. You see some that have hundreds of risks and issues, and it just becomes a cottage industry to manage those. And then you have others where they've got a handful and people pay scant regard to anything that's a risk.
Yeah, and a quite common practice, I think, is lots of programs think it's very encouraging to, let's say on a Monday morning, to send out a reminder to everyone, say, remember you've got a risk logged here that's due this week, or you've got an issue logged here that's due this week. Sometimes not even this week. Sometimes just your name is appearing on a register somewhere. How many people would read that email? If you see a heading saying risk and issues update followed by date, you've got another 6-7 emails that are more important waiting. I mean, which one?
Well, my view on email anyway.
Yeah.
That's a topic for another day. But sending them out by email is completely the wrong thing to do. There's got to be something that's more visible. If you think about some of the tools that we're using internally now within Resulting, and the way that we start to manage our boards, it's a lot more visible. I never get emails now about client risks. I actually get an action assigned to me, and I actually have something physical and tangible that I can move around, like on a Kanban board, to say that this is progress. So, typically with our clients, we go in and we're using their raid management tool, their raid management approach. But maybe what we've got to do is actually get better at looking at some of the newer ways that we're using and trying to get them to adopt some of that. Our Kanban approach that we're using for raids now is proven to be really successful. Maybe that's something we can take into those PMO meetings.
Yeah, and it stems back to ownership. I think another let's say a gripe I have is allowing somebody to sit on their desk and assign a mitigation for a risk to somebody potentially in another building, potentially working in another country location. does that person know they've got to do something? It's the action bit that's quite interesting. You know, does everyone in the program know what they have to do to close genuine risks or resolve genuine issues? That's a bit. I think that's another.
I agree, but and think about when we've done this really well in terms of setting up PMO structures from scratch, which is when you've got the opportunity to really determine what the process should be. What works really well is when we get everybody together as part of the kick-off. And we actually do, I know people think it's boring, but you know, a bit of a deep dive in terms of how we're going to manage the raid. And because you need to have a raid approach. Every program needs it. So a common understanding and a common view of why it's so important, I think, sets the right tone for the program. You need the right level of management buy-in as well. You know, frequently the senior people in the program don't even go to the raid meeting.
Yeah.
So when it's right, you set the right tone at the beginning, you get the right level of sponsorship, and you make sure that those people are there. As you said, you drive accountability, and you make sure that there's a warm handoff when you assign a risk, when you assign an issue, when you assign a mitigation, so people feel that sense of accountability and ownership, and you sit with them, explain what that means. You don't send them an email. And then I think there's the tooling, more visible, tangible tooling to feel that progress is being made rather than SharePoint and email, and it's kind of just a distraction. For me, that's what makes a difference on something that's always a pretty dry topic, but if you get it right, it's fundamental to the success of the program.
More so this day and age where there's no single source vendors. You know, you have lots of independent people working on programs. You have potentially 2 or 3 key vendors in different areas. You know, you think about you traditionally now don't have your data is dealt by a vendor somewhere who's a specialist in that area. You have a ASI who will come in and do, let's say, config development work. You know, it's important that they all have that same understanding. So those kickoff sessions are important. And actually, if you onboard somebody new, you need to have that kickoff session with them. So I think, yeah, your point is absolutely valid.
It's the discipline that runs right the way through. You've got to set the right tone.